I'm coaching grade 7 volleyball right now. They're like 3 weeks, 4 weeks into their volleyball careers. And in practice, they're actually pretty wild. They're kind of kids that have learned sports on the playground. And so they have that natural talent. In warm up in these little mini tournaments we go to, where we play against other schools, they're jump setting, they're calling the ball. They just want that ball. And then these mini 10-minute games come on. Their energy level goes from a 9 out of 10 to a 2 out of 10. That look in their face where these very brave boys suddenly look terrified has me fascinated about trying to operate at our best in a state of fear and of stress.
Nate, that's why I wrote the book. I was stressed at work. Not unlike the volleyball players, I was looking at the scoreboard in money management and freezing.
Welcome to Leading with Curiosity. Command and control leadership is dead. We interview leaders, entrepreneurs, and executive coaches challenging old paradigms and fostering cutting-edge leadership. Here's your host, certified executive coach, Nate Leslie.
What do 12-year-old volleyball players playing volleyball for their first time and corporate leaders have in common? That's something we're going to explore today because my guest, Sebastien Page, is the Chief Investment Officer at T. Rowe Price, but we're not going to talk about money today. We're going to talk about people and the psychology of leadership, which is the title of his most recent book. Sebastien, welcome to Leading with Curiosity.
Nate, I'm fired up. We're recording this is toward the end of the week, and I'm so excited about conversation today.
I'm coaching grade 7 volleyball right now, and the boys I'm coaching, it's their first year. They're like 3 weeks, 4 weeks into their volleyball careers. And in practice, they're actually pretty wild. They're a really active group in downtown Vancouver here. They're really energetic. They're kind of a group of kids that have learned sports on the playground. And so they have that natural talent. In warm up in these little mini tournaments we go to, where we play against other schools, they're great. They're exciting. They're jump setting. They're calling the ball. They're, stepping on each other's toes. They just want that ball. And then these mini 10-minute games come on. Parent volunteer referees like me, there are a few parents in the gym, but their energy level goes from a 9 out of 10 to a 2 out of 10. And they start like hands in their pockets and fiddling. By the end of the hour, we're literally getting back to where we were, but just seeing that look in their face where these very brave boys suddenly look terrified has me fascinated about this idea of trying to operate at our best in a state of fear, and a state of stress. I think this connects to why you wrote your book, The Psychology of Leadership. But what's coming to mind for you right now, and how did you end up writing this book?
I love that intro and the teaser. What do leaders in the corporate world have in common with 12-year-old volleyball players? Sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. It's actually, Nate, that's why I wrote the book. I was stressed at work. Not unlike the volleyball players, I was looking at the scoreboard in money management and freezing a little bit.
Hey, there it is.
So
Yeah.
not only was I stressed, but I was also stressing about stressing. I was telling myself, I've been doing this for 25 years. I shouldn't have that reaction to the intensity of the job. I ended up exploring sports psychology, positive psychology, as well as personality psychology. Wrote the book part-time on the weekends, read hundreds of scientific articles because I'm a nerd. I've published in scientific journals in finance and economics, so I had a lot of fun reading scientific literature from another field and making connections, and ultimately published The Psychology of Leadership recently a few months ago. But the genesis, the origin story is I was stressed at work and I wanted to improve myself. And in the intro of the book, I ended up writing to my readers, you're reading this for self-improvement. I wrote it for the same reason. Now, let's go to the volleyball players for a second.
Okay.
There are a few things going on here that I discuss in The Psychology of Leadership. First, I'm going to surmise that there's a difference for them between practicing, having fun, and being live in a game when they're looking at the scoreboard. And that difference is documented in sports psychology as the mastery orientation versus the ego orientation. A mastery oriented athlete gets excited about getting better at what they do. A golf player gets excited about improving their swing. That's a mastery orientation. In business, in my world, I get excited about getting better at finding new sources of research to understand capital markets, all mastery. But when the scoreboard turns on, now it turns into ego, which is a different motivation and a different stress level. So I think there's a little bit of that going on. Second, I'm going to guess they're clearly having a stress response.
Yes.
One of the main findings in the book that applied directly to my life was realizing that optimal performance does not happen at a stress level of 0, that you actually need stress and activation, well documented in sports psychology. However, the stress response looks like an inverted U curve. And when you get too stressed in sports or in life, you choke. And then stress hurts your performance, not only your performance, it hurts your health. It's bad for you. Your cortisol levels get all out of whack. But these curves, in my mind, when I picture your volleyball players, the stress is just at the right level. They're having fun practicing. The scoreboard turns on and they tip to the other side of the curve.
Yes.
And a way
that
to
is it.
not tip to the other side of the curve is to realize that stress is just activation and you can turn it into fuel for performance. The other thing, Nate, that I think is happening is that when they're practicing, they're in flow. And when you're in flow, you lose track of time, you're in the moment. And when the scoreboard turns on, they kind of lose that sense of flow. So a lot of concepts here
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
talk about psychology of leadership that have applications in business apply to your analogy of the players freezing when the scoreboard turns on.
You nailed it. So we'll keep this about leadership and business, but we'll use the 12-year-old kids as that metaphor or analogy. And that inverted U, I can just picture it. They've tipped over past that peak of the U, over from that healthy level of stress into something else, and that flow is suddenly gone. In addressing it, we're trying to keep reminding them that we are literally here to fall in love with volleyball. And it's about learning. And so therefore it's about that mastery, the pure joy of getting better at something. So can we get even managing this stress? Could we get 10% better at it each week? I know my coaching style. It's not for pressure of the score in grade 7 in 10-minute games. And so for you, where did that show up when you tipped over beyond flow into that essentially overstressed, and you're coming down the other side of that curve and that peak performance curve? How did that manifest for you when you were dealing with so much stress?
Well, we all know that stress is ultimately bad for you when you're on that other side of the curve. It will impact your sleep, it will impact your mood, your appetite, ultimately your health. I wasn't tipping into that region, the far region of the inverted part of the stress curve, but I could tell I was getting closer. And
You're
I
headed there.
remember, there was a moment I was getting irritable, right? I've been lucky to never suffer from clinical anxiety, which is a bit separate from what we're talking about here because it can be debilitating and it's more of a medical condition. I'm
Yeah.
talking about run-of-the-mill stress. But run-of-the-mill stress, there's a lot behind it and it impacts your life as well. I was at home and I was stressed about work, and usually I can stop thinking about work and have a good night's sleep. I know you've talked about sleep in prior episodes of your
Yeah.
podcast. It's important. And the kids were being noisy. I have 2 teenagers in the house, and they were playing stuff on their iPads and music and arguing and slamming doors. I was trying to go to bed early because I knew I needed to get my sleep. And I'm someone who's really cool and calm, especially at home. I leave the work at the workplace. But at that moment, I was just like, I kind of screamed a little bit, right? Which is very rare for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, shut that noise. I need to sleep. And my wife looked at me and was like, what's up? And it kind
Not
of like
yourself.
she's so good to me and helped me just look at this, become self-aware of where I was in my professional life and personal life that wasn't a healthy spot. Nate, you know what I did? I ended up talking to a sports psychologist. His name is
Interesting.
Dr. Daniel Zimmett. He lives in Maryland, where I live. He's a fascinating person because not only is he a PhD sports psychologist, he trains Olympic athletes on their mental games, pro baseball players, NFL players. He's also an athlete, and he holds 40 national titles in the sport of handball. Now, for our audience, are you familiar with handball, Nate?
Vaguely from my time in Europe where it's so popular. Yeah.
Well, and there are also different sports that are called handball. So the one he plays is like squash, but you use your
Oh,
hand to whack
oh,
the
okay.
ball.
Okay. Yeah.
So he
Okay.
he has 40 national titles. We sit down and I wanted to learn more about sports psychology. He decides to tell me the story of the best match he ever played, his best match ever. The match took place 10 years prior to that conversation. But it's kind of strange because he remembers everything about the match. He remembers at point 3, the ball hit the back wall. It bounced that way. I made that shot. And then there's emotion in him retelling the story. I was on my knees. I made an extreme, impossible shot. But then something strange happens. Out of, in a very nonchalant way, he says, then I lost the next 2 points and kind of tries to move on in the conversation. And I cut him off and I go, wait, you lost that. And that's what he was getting at. It was, as a sports psychologist that day on the court, winning or losing the match meant absolutely nothing because he had a pure mastery orientation and realized, as he was playing a much stronger opponent, that he had played the best in his entire career and that he had made a giant leap in his ability to play the game. So then we
Mm,
started talking about mastery versus ego. So for our 12-year-old volleyball players, they kind of have to get into that mindset that it's about the game. It's about
yeah.
getting better at the game as opposed to what the scoreboard is showing and all the eyes, all the parents looking at them when it counts. Right? I'm not about to tell you how to coach, Nate, because I don't coach. I don't know how to coach, but just finding a way to build mastery into your team that you're coaching. And in my world, in the business world, into the organization, because in business, we're actually really good at what we call KPIs, key performance indicators. We know how to keep score, especially money management. We don't spend enough time on mastery goals. How do we get better at what we do for the sake of getting better? Because that's important and that's what we're about. You know what? I get excited about stuff like at work. Hey, we're running meetings better. We're having better
Yeah.
conversations because we're more organized in our meetings.
Yeah.
Pure
Yeah.
business mastery, right?
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with an ego, KPI, or a goal or the scoreboard. There's not
I,
enough of that in business.
you
As
know what?
leaders, you can bring a mastery mindset to your team.
You haven't coached volleyball, and I guarantee you could come out with this group of boys who I mentioned have kind of learned it on the playground. They're a recess and lunch hour rat pack,
Yeah.
and you could help them understand the joy of mastery. Like, even if you can't describe how the ball should come off of their hands, they know when it feels right, and like celebrating that moment and do more of that and celebrate, the tiny milestones, even if you don't know the sport. I bet you might have to fly you in for our practice next week, Sebastian.
Well, Nate, it's research backed because there's research that shows if you praise efforts in kids rather than praise the outcome, oh, you're so smart, you got an A, but you praise the process, the effort, you were so resilient, you struggled with that math problem, they end up performing better over time.
Let's segue into this positive psychology. You report in your book that in some research that you did in a given year, there was as many articles on positive psychology in journals as there was about clinical psychology. I have not studied positive psychology. You are also not a psychologist. You are a chief investment officer in a large firm, but your passion for it has you talking about this similar topics on, Bloomberg TV and CNBC. This stuff matters to humans, to adults. Share with our listener on the power of focusing on what is good versus always trying to fix what's bad.
Yeah, I love that question, Nate. I've been digging into the research in positive psychology for several years now. I've also benefited from the advice of the sports psychologist I mentioned earlier, Dr. Daniel Zimmer. He ended up being my scientific referee for the book, The Psychology of
Oh,
Leadership, to
okay.
make sure I was interpreting the research in the right way. But you're absolutely right. I'm not a psychologist by training. It's not my day job. But for me, what I bring is the leadership experience, the business experience into that perspective of research. Too many books are just research, right?
Mhm.
And
Okay.
then too
Yep.
many books are just, a successful business person who's just kind of making up stuff. And I'm trying to bring things together here. So, what do we mean by positive psychology? Very simple. What makes people thrive over time? How do you achieve high performance or ultra high performance? Those are key questions that positive psychology seeks to answer. Marty Seligman is widely credited as the founder, if you will, or one of the pillars of positive psychology. He built a model that, I got to say, I don't like acronyms, but I love that one. It's PERMA, and it describes how positive psychology works. P stands for positive emotion, what we seek every day. Good glass of wine with a friend, getting a bunch of likes on social media. And IRMA speaks to what makes people thrive in the long run. E stands for engagement. We were just talking about flow. R stands for positive relationship, the number one factor of long-term happiness. And believe it or not, physical health is positive relationships in your life. Stands for meaning. A stands for long-term accomplishment. Bringing more IRMA in your life, in your organization, is going to help you and your organization thrive over time. So that's a basic 101 on positive psychology. The way I like to introduce this is to talk about Felix Baumgartner. Now, let me ask you, Nate, he did something absolutely amazing, but he's not that famous. Have you ever heard the name?
No, I have not.
So sometimes I ask audience, like, raise your hand if you know Felix Baumgartner, and I get like 3% of the hands come up. He did something no human had ever done. And when I start telling the story, you might remember what he did. 2012, Felix Baumgartner is a daredevil. He gets into a small capsule tied to a giant helium balloon and goes up in space 24 miles to the edge of space where there's almost no gravity left, just to
Okay.
the edge of space, 24 miles up.
Yeah.
And then, Nate, you know what he did?
I think
He
so.
jumped out.
Yeah.
He
Okay. Yeah.
skydived. He's
Yeah.
famous for having skydived from space 24 miles down. He fell for 10 minutes. 4 minutes was free falling. No one had ever done this. First human to break the sound barrier. He just had like a special suit and a helmet. And, he could have passed out, but he did this amazing feat. I love telling that story because Felix Baumgartner was coached by a sports psychologist throughout his training. And the day off, he had in his ear a sports psychologist, Michael Trevette, famous sports psychologist, talking to him and coaching him. What an example of how the positive side of psychology will help you not only thrive, not only achieve higher performance, but do incredible things like ultra high performance. And you're a hockey player. I don't know how prevalent it is in hockey teams, but I can tell you baseball, the mindset is really important. 8 out of 9 teams in baseball have a full-time sports psychologist on
Yeah.
staff. And I
Yeah.
guarantee you the other two are just not telling you because they're competitive and they don't want you to know. Now, I'm conflating a little bit sports and positive psychology, but they're related and they borrow some of the same research and principle. They're very close. But sports is specifically about the performance, the ultra high performance, flow, mindfulness. Michael Jordan, the best athletes, they all rely on this. A lot
And
of
let's
them have coaches that help them with their mindset.
and let's talk about how you believe it's missing in the business world in comparison to how athletes are gravitating to it now.
It's completely underrated in the business world. Athletes love feedback. In the business world, not so much. And why is that? We should learn to love feedback because it helps improving. And so when you talk about engagement, look at the surveys in America when we ask people at work, are you engaged? It's horrible. You get like 22% response saying, I'm engaged with my work. I mean, something's missing. And these things, they sound theoretical: engagement, positive relationships, meaning, long-term accomplishment, positive psychology, sports psychology, resilience. It's very practical and highly underrated in the workplace. And
Here's
so that's my goal. That's my goal with the psychology of leadership, is to make it relevant to the practice of business.
You've hit on something that's a big part of my model as an executive coach and leadership facilitator, is this idea that engagement is something people choose to do. Are you engaged? Are you leaning in or are you leaning back? You can't make somebody engaged, but some of these things in this PERMA, like building strong relationships, helping them identify with meaning in their work, tracking and celebrating long-term and short-term accomplishments, focusing on the good, focusing on the development, the learning, a growth mindset, people will, according to the research and the assessment that I use, choose to
Yes,
engage more deeply. What do you make of that?
absolutely. Those are the paths to engagement.
The
I
path
had
to
a summer
engagement.
job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a summer job when I started. I had no work ethic, which is another way of saying I was lazy. I was a teenager, and it was general building maintenance. A two-man crew. We had a pickup truck and we had like lawnmower. We had many tasks to do. None of them were really fun, like sweeping parking lots, cleaning the roof of factories, mowing the lawn, painting. We worked for this real estate mogul who owned all these commercial and residential buildings, and we were just a cleanup crew. And however, there were certain jobs, certain tasks where I would get into it and kind of lose track of time instead of like waiting for the
Flow.
break and
You get into
flow.
flow. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when I was writing the book, I was thinking about that first summer job and asking myself, what was the difference between the tasks where I would lose sense of time, get into it, versus the task where I would just count the minutes? One key factor was I able to notice my progress? Mowing the lawn,
Wow. Yeah.
I would get into it because I could really track the progress in real time, get the real time feedback and the satisfaction of tracking my progress. Well, apply that to engagement in the workplace. There are ways that you can give more frequent feedback, that you can build trackers for progress that will increase engagement. And to your point, Nate, it's not about, hey, be engaged. It's
Yeah.
about people getting into it intrinsically, developing the intrinsic motivation to do these things. And that's one trick. There are many other tricks, but one trick is to give the feedback, show progress, let people see their progress. Also, the theory of flow says you can't make it too easy, which is interesting,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
We all want actually a challenge that we have the skills to meet, but you can't make it too hard either because then we get discouraged. So you have to calibrate your goals with your teams to be right in the channel between too easy and too hard. And then build this tracking mechanism where people get the feedback and you'll see almost magically engagement increase.
The purpose of work, that healthy tension comes back to the curve we talked about with the volleyball boys, the healthy tension between too easy and too hard. In between there's an opportunity for growth. Most people don't want a job that is so impossible that they'll feel like they are making absolutely no progress and that they never have a chance to achieve a goal. Most of us also don't want it so easy that you could actually do it while sleeping. Probably not a listener of this podcast. There's a listener of another podcast out there that just wants to coast. But for most of us who are professionals in care, there's a human desire to matter and to make a contribution, and that requires some effort.
Yeah, and Nate, you're driving towards the importance of meaning as well, which increases engagement. I love to use the analogy of the three bricklayers. I have this in the psychology of leadership, and when I put it in there, I was hesitant because I thought everyone knows this analogy, the three bricklayers. And then talking to audiences over the last few months since I launched the book, I realized it's kind of been lost in time, kind of like the Felix Baumgartner story. The three bricklayers, it goes as follows. The architect walks to three bricklayers. He asks the first one, "What are you doing?" The first one responds, "I'm laying bricks." He asks the second one. Second one responds, "I'm building a wall." And that bricklayer seems just a little bit more engaged. Then the architect asks the third bricklayer, "What are you doing?" The third bricklayer, who's fully engaged, energetic, says, "I'm a cathedral builder. I'm building this awesome cathedral."
Yeah.
I love that analogy because it's three people doing the exact same job at very different levels of engagement. And the one that seeks and finds the most meaning in their contribution to the broader project of building the cathedral is more engaged. So if we have a crisis of engagement in America where 22% of the respondents say they're actually engaged in work, maybe we don't talk enough about the meaning of what we do at work. I had an offsite yesterday with hundreds of people, my team, and I spent quite a bit of time talking about why we manage money for clients to improve their financial lives, to help them put their kids through college, to help them accumulate more money so they can have better retirements, to help them pay their bills. I said, we're not curing cancer or world hunger, but what we do is very meaningful. The people we manage money for,
Yeah.
they depend on us for a better financial future.
And you just said it right there. It's okay if laying the bricks is the thing you need to do. We as leaders have an obligation when we care about these types of things to help people make the connection. And it doesn't always come naturally. It comes more naturally to some than others, but helping them make that connection. No, what are we really doing here? We're literally enabling kids to go to college, or we're literally enabling people to, not stress over groceries in their older age. And that might be different for different people. And when one of those team members at your offsite latches on to the helping kids go to college idea, and another one latches on to helping grandmas and grandpas be able to feed themselves and not stress about money, whichever it is, that's good. Stick with that. Right. And helping people make that connection to the
And that's
bigger
key, Nate,
purpose.
because most of us as leaders, we don't think about this as being our responsibility. It's secondary. It's something that might be on a PowerPoint somewhere, but it is our job. It's a big part of our job. And when people have meaning, it might sound cheesy in the moment. Maybe a few people roll their eyes yesterday when I was talking about this. But over time, when you have ups and downs at work every day and you're tired and you're stressed, it really matters to feel like you're doing something that's making a real contribution.
If there's a leader listening that says, I want to try this, it's a blind spot they've had, and they're like, oh, I haven't really focused on that meaning piece. Say to them, if a few people rolled their eyes yesterday, a few out of 100 is a huge win. 4 or 5 people out of a couple hundred, do it anyways. We're not doing it for the 5 out of 200 that might have rolled their eyes. We're doing it for the 195. And of those 5, some rolled their eyes, but later they're like, actually, Sebastien was right on that. That's actually feeling better. Someone rolled their eyes because the way they grew up, or the hard knocks that they've had, or reasons beyond your control as their leader. And so we just know it's right. If there's a listener here that's like, I know this is right, I should try it, I say, be scared and do it anyways.
it's
Yeah.
not obvious what a person who's doing something that's really part of a giant corporation, a giant machine, the bricklayer, it might not be clear to them how they're contributing to the cathedral. So why wouldn't the architect turn back to the other two and explain to them what's happening and how awesome the cathedral is going to be, right? So it's a responsibility of the leader that's so often neglected. But, the, find your why, it's become a bit of a cheesy corporate thing, but if you just put it into practice, it will matter.
Yeah. And somebody out there might be at an organization where they struggle to find that meaning in what they do. And then maybe that person decides, well, I'm going to go find work where it does matter, right?
Yeah.
So there's both. There's finding meaning in what you're currently doing. And then there's also checking in with your own values. If your own core values aren't being served in your role, it's entirely possible that somewhere else might be a better fit. Both are wins, right? If you have someone on your team that just couldn't relate at all to the purpose and through that process they realize they're better somewhere else, you'd rather they go too.
Yeah, and just being aligned. Being aligned matters. Let's say you work for a defense company. What
Good
I'm about to
example.
say has got nothing to do with politics, right? But let's say you work for a defense company. You might be super excited about contributing to defending your country. Or you might be kind of uneasy about the fact that you're part of a company that builds weapons, right? And over time, it might not work for you. But if whatever's happening in whatever company, to be aligned from the sense of meaning is important in my mind. Look, I have a friend in California. He's an engineer. He's a no BS kind of guy. He swears a lot. He's secretly wealthy. Like, he wears old t-shirts, but he's actually built his own company and is very successful. We're very good friends. He calls me a bankster all the time because for him, anybody who works in money management or finance is up to no good. So a few months ago, I'm having a glass of wine with him and he drops the bankster thing again, right? He's an
Yeah.
engineer. He builds these bolts that you put into cement to build structures, and I don't even know how it works. But he's like, hey, bankster. And that night, I kind of decided to have the conversation I talked about why I go to work every day, why we manage money for people to improve their financial lives. And that's part of the mission. And we had a good discussion, but you know what? He wasn't convinced. And I came back to work and we're still very good friends, right? But I came back to work and I wrote a whole article about what we do in money management, why we do it, about active management relative to index strategies. And it was a little bit of a rant, but it was also from the heart. And
Good
Nate
combo.
it's inspiration. I never thought our marketing team would allow me to do this, but they did because we're a very buttoned up, serious company, right?
Yeah.
I wrote the title of the article was as follows. My friend called my profession BS. Here's what I answered. And the article went kind of viral. People can find it on LinkedIn. It actually became part of a chapter in the psychology of leadership. So that story is in there. But it was all is a debate about meaning. For my friend, what I do had no meaning. And for me, it did.
I'm going to read that article, then I'm going to share it as a teaser to this podcast on LinkedIn, so it can make it easy for my followers to find you. Sebastien, if you have a final message for the leaders listening to this conversation right now, what's your hope for them?
Well, I want to go back to our volleyball players because that's where we started. Right, Nate? You talked about how the volleyball players are enjoying mastery, enjoying flow, enjoying the game as they're practicing, and then the scoreboard turns on and they are hit with a stress response, maybe a little bit of goal-induced blindness. They obsess over the goal too much. That's what I want to leave with our audience. You're a leader, even if you don't work inside a company where people report to you formally. Your family's looking up to you. You're a leader in your community, in your church. Everyone's a leader in one way or the other, whether you want it or not. And therefore, positive sports psychology brings tremendous, tremendous help to that burden and that joy of being a leader. So I encourage people to look into it. I know your podcast does this every episode, so I'm glad to have participated a little bit.
I love that we got to finish with that, tying it up where we started, this idea of goal-induced blindness, the stress that can be caused in your life by focusing too much on that outcome. Sebastien Page, author of Psychology of Leadership, thank you so much for joining us today.
Nate, thank you. This was a ton of fun.
Thanks for listening to Leading with Curiosity. Please share, follow, and rate the show so that other leaders can make positive change in the world. Connect with Nate at nateleslie.ca. And remember, the brain behaves very differently when encouraged to think rather than told to listen.